And welcome everyone, and thank you so much for being here. My name is Claire Sauvage-Mar, and in my role here at BC Healthy Communities, I am the Grants and Engagement Coordinator. It's so nice to have you guys all attending today's webinar, Connecting for Active Communities During COVID-19 and Beyond. Okay, so here's a look at today's agenda. If you can see it, just give me a little thumbs up so I can make sure that everyone gets it. Okay, great. We are recording this session and notes are going to be taken. Oh, great, everyone can see it. That's awesome. At the end of today's webinar, we are going to be asking for some feedback through an evaluation survey. So please keep an eye out for an email coming your way. The notes that we take today will also be themed at a high level so you can get a sense of what the learnings were from today. So please look out for that email. And BC Healthy Communities begins all of our webinars with an acknowledgement that we are guests on unceded territories. We recognize that we're operating in a settler colonial framework and that colonialism has contributed to and exacerbated health inequities, especially in Indigenous communities. So acknowledging and working to understand the implications of settler colonialism on our work is a good spot to start some positive change towards building healthy communities for all. And today, one of our co-facilitators, Kim Lemming, will be doing a land acknowledgement. So please help me in welcoming Kim.
Awesome, thanks, Claire. Yeah, so I know we're kind of across the province today, but I'm just going to give a brief territory acknowledgement where I'm currently residing. So I'm Cree from Lac Orange, Saskatchewan, so I'm a guest on the Comox First Nations territory here on Vancouver Island. I actually live in Fanny Bay, so it's a shared territory between Comox and Qualicum. So I am so thankful and grateful to be here in the Comox Valley, which is the land of plenty, and just welcome everyone to the table. And if you don't know already, at the end of the sessions, if you're not too sure of where you're residing on what traditional territory, I just challenge you to find that out and explore that curiosity within yourself. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Kim. We're really grateful to have you with us here today. And to explain a little bit more about BC Healthy Communities and the PlanH program, I'm going to invite our communications manager, Johanna Henderson, to the floor. Whenever you're ready, Jo, go ahead.
Thanks, Claire. All right, if you can advance us to the next slide there, we'll have a little bit of information. So yeah, for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are BC Healthy Communities. We're a province-wide not-for-profit, and we facilitate the ongoing development of healthy, thriving, and resilient communities. And we really believe through our work that it's possible, and not only just possible, it's just absolutely necessary for us to create communities where it's easy for citizens to be healthy and well. And so to do that, we operate at the intersection between planning and public health, which I think are a couple of lenses that a lot of folks in this meeting right now hold. So it's exciting to all be here together. And a little bit of information about our PlanH program. This webinar is part of that PlanH program. And for those of you who are not familiar with PlanH, welcome. We hope to see you at more of our PlanH events, and we hope to get you interested in more of our resources. PlanH is a partnership between BC Healthy Communities and the BC Ministry of Health, and its goal is to create healthier communities across BC. So it supports local governments and health authorities as they work together to improve health and well-being in communities across the province. And PlanH does this in two main ways. Firstly, through funding and providing support for healthy community projects across BC. So we have a grant program that is currently accepting applications, and I think Claire will explain a little bit more about that later on in the webinar. And the second way that we do that is through developing and sharing tools and resources that help communities take action to improve health and well-being, which is why we're here today. This is one of those tools and resources. So thank you so much for joining us. I'll hand it back to Claire now.
Thanks, Jo. And moving right along, we're going to do a quick tech check. So the first thing I'd like everyone to do is have you rename yourselves. So on your screen, on your Zoom window, please find your image and the box with your video in it. Click the 3 dots in the top right corner of your image and select rename. And please change your name to be first and last, as well as your organization if you're comfortable. And the reason that we're doing this is we will be breaking out into breakout room sessions at the on the tail end of this this webinar. So it's nice to be able to address each other by name. So again, find those 3 dots in the top right corner and change your name so that we know who you are. And again, I just want to reiterate that the chat box is open, so feel free to continue to introduce yourselves. And our Healthy Communities Planner, Emily Johnson, will be taking care of that chat box. Please feel free to include any questions as they come up there, and we will also be making time for answering some questions as well. So as you're finishing up renaming yourselves, I'll quickly introduce our 11 co-facilitators for the day. So first up, we have Jen Butcher. She is a community well-being specialist at BC Healthy Communities. Jen is based in Vancouver and has recently returned from maternity leave, so we're really excited to have her back. Yeah. Hi, Jen. All right, next up is Kevin Bowie, Manager of Sport Development for Via Sport BC. Until recently, Kevin was involved in developing BC wheelchair sports programs, including BC Wheelchair Rugby. We're really pleased to meet Kevin now that he's settling into his new role at Via Sport. It's really great to have you on the call, Kevin. Samantha Boyce is legal counsel for the Municipal Insurance Association of BC, or MIABC. MIABC has been hosting a really incredible think tank series on COVID-19. It's a series of very relevant conversations which include lawyers, municipal insurance experts, and leaders from various sectors who are coming together to share their insights on moving forward through COVID. So it's really nice to have Samantha on the call today. Next up, we have Jacob Kramer. Jake is a researcher and planning assistant at BC Healthy Communities. I know personally that Jake is an avid outdoorsman and a really great asset to BCHC's engagement work. So we're really excited to have Jake here as well. Vanessa Cumming is the recreation manager for the city of Fort St. John. And we're really glad to have her with us here today. Her career in recreation has taken her all over the province, and she is committed to improving inclusivity and breaking down barriers to physical activity. And finally, on this slide, we've got Sarah Dyer, who is another BC Healthy Communities staff member. Sarah is our newest community well-being specialist and oversees our age-friendly initiatives. Abby Fortune is the manager of recreation and tourism in the district of Ucluelet. So she's looking very much like a Yuki local in this photo here. We're very happy to have Abby with us here today. Yuki has been a model of keeping their community informed and active during COVID-19. The Yuki Recreation Recreated social media pages have proven that even while we're apart, we're still able to be physically active together. So it's really nice to have her joining us here today. And you guys have all heard this morning already from Kim Lemming. Kim is Provincial Coordinator for Sport for Life programs at iSpark, the Indigenous Sport, Physical Activity and Recreation Council. Thanks so much for joining us, Kim. And Marina Sen is also from the Municipal Insurance Association of BC. She is Insurance Services Coordinator and has also been involved in delivering the COVID Think Tank series. Thanks so much for joining. Thanks so much for joining us today, Marina. It's really nice to have more than one of you guys from MIABC here while we're navigating these very complicated times. And our last 2 co-facilitators are both from Northern Health Authority. Lindsay Siegmiller is a healthy settings advisor with the Population and Preventive Public Health team. She's based in Haida Gwaii and works closely with a number of communities to improve health outcomes, and we're very excited to have her joining us here today. And finally, we've got Tina Stroostholm, who is the lead for person and community engagement at Northern Health Authority. Tina is based in Prince George, and she is a community engagement professional, and we're very happy to be working with her here today. So thank you so much to the co-facilitators who you will be meeting later on in this, this webinar. And I just wanted to express my gratitude and our gratitude for the chance to work with so many great people from around the province. So let's get started. Today our webinar is going to be focusing on how physical activity can be built on and encouraged at the community level. I'm just going to turn off my video and allow you to focus on the slides. And I'll set the scene for our discussion on building active communities in an equitable way after walking you through our new PlanH resource, the Active Communities tool. And then I'll hand you off to our great co-facilitators for some small group discussions. Please be aware that I am going to be bringing up some concepts and ideas that are related to equity throughout today's session. I do plan on talking about how active communities in the way that we experience them now in BC are shaped by systemic issues such as racism, sexism, and settler colonialism. So some of it may be uncomfortable or unfamiliar, and I just wanted to share ahead of time that I'll be covering some difficult subjects, but I hope that it lays a foundation for some thoughtful discussion in the breakout room sessions. So here we go. ParticipAction, a national organization which focuses on physical activity, puts out a biannual report card on the state of physical activity across Canada. And they've just released their 2020 report card on physical activity in children and youth. This was just actually, I think even last week. It's very, very recent. So on this slide, you're looking at 8 of the 14 indicators which are used to make an overall snapshot of Canadian physical activity in children and youth. And as in previous years, we're not doing very well. You'll see that there's an F for active play. There's also an F for reaching 24-hour movement behaviors. And in that bottom left-hand corner, there's a D+ for physical education and a D+ above that for overall physical activity. So we're simply not moving enough. Our kids aren't moving enough. And similar findings were reported in the 2019 report card on physical activity for adults. So I think that Emily is putting some links into the chat box for those resources. And this is just to give you an idea of the uphill battle that we might be facing in increasing physical activity. One way that we can encourage physical activity is by creating active communities. And an active community is a community which has built and social environment features which make it easy for people to regularly use physical activity, which make it easy for people to use physical activity. And within the framework of planning, active communities require settings, policies, infrastructure, as well as programming in order to be successful. And some of you may know that PlanH has developed a lot of action guides over the years, which have been used by local governments and health authorities to build healthier communities for all. And we've developed an active communities tool in order to complement the existing PlanH Active Communities Guide, which is available on the PlanH website. This tool was developed to bring together these 2 provincial level strategies, the BC Active Transportation Strategy on the right, Move, Commute, Connect, which is under the broader Clean BC initiative, and also the BC Physical Activity Strategy, Active People, Active Places. So the aim of this resource is to provide local governments and their partners an efficient way to start conversations that build toward action in communities. So here's the inside of the newly launched Active Communities tool. We've designed it as a decision tree game. And the way you interact with it is by starting in this upper left-hand corner in the bright orange start circle. And you follow this gray path on your journey towards an active communities. And along the way, you get asked 6 thought starter questions in these yellow circles. And depending on if you answer no or yes, then you will be directed to different resources. So I'm going to walk you through all of these different sections as quickly as possible, just so you get a sense of how you might be able to use it in your work. So the first question that you're asked is, has my community identified active living as a priority? And if you answer no to this question, then you follow this little dirt path to the first focus area, focus on healthy public policy. And what we note here is that including a commitment to active living in community level documents allows for a whole host of actions to take place. And then we give a few examples of communities who have developed, for example, an active transportation plan or included a commitment to physical activity in an official community plan, an OCP. We also point to resources from the BC Centers for Disease Control and the BC Alliance for Healthy Living, just to get the ball rolling in this discussion. Now, on the other hand, if you answer yes to that initial question, you move along to the next one, which asks, do we have enough funding to support active communities initiatives? And I'm sure I don't have to tell anyone about the challenge of finding funding. So we put a few examples here on how to start the search. And by the way, as Joe mentioned at the top of this webinar, the PlanH capacity building grants are still open until July 15th. So if you represent a local government, there is still time to submit an application, and we hope that you can forward that information on to any local governments that you work with as well. So following this road, the next question is about engaging our community. And it's specifically about engaging our community in an equitable way. So when we're talking about equity, this is a reminder to us that some groups face greater barriers to health than others. So equity-seeking groups, for example, older adults, LGBTQ+ folks, Indigenous peoples, people with disabilities, and also people with compromised immune systems may not have as much access to physical activity. And in the context of community engagement, they're also often the ones that are not heard from in the decision-making process. So we have to constantly be asking ourselves if we're missing important voices at the table. Who's not being heard from, but will be impacted by my project or initiative? That's a really good place to start if you want to build equity into your engagement. And I will be going a bit deeper into equity shortly, but we've included it in this active communities tool because we want to encourage shared language within and across organizations. And to that end, the fourth question is about building multi-sectoral partnerships. Many of us have examples of starting a collaboration, but coming up against a lack of shared understanding on some basics. So if you're entering a new partnership and folks just don't have enough time to take in both of those provincial level documents that I spoke about, this tool can be an efficient and hopefully a fun way to meet on common ground. And these last two boxes here are focused on designing the built environment to promote physical activity, community design, as well as ensuring that active living programs are available. And again, we provide some examples from around the province, including an active transportation plan from the city of Fort St. John, and another link to a really incredible document, which is the BC Active Transportation Design Guide. The design guide it's a very technical document, which is more geared at the engineering staff at local governments, but it's really impressive, quite large, and it's getting picked up in international contexts. So if you haven't checked out this really amazing resource, just have a look at it, and it's really incredible, and I think it's worth sharing as well. And in this final box on programming, there are some examples of organizations such as iSpark, who are working to create healthy living programs for all. And there's also an example from a local government. There's also an example from the regional district of Okanagan and Smokening. This particular program was working to increase physical literacy programming through a series of Try It days. So that's definitely a fun one to check out as well. And there's also a reference to evaluation tucked away in this area, but it may be that some of you on the call have more expertise in evaluating active communities projects than we do. So please feel free to share those in the breakout room discussions. I also wanted to note that there are some really important guidelines which are coming out of the BC Parks and Recreation Association, as well as Via Sport, on the reopening of facilities as well as sport. So please visit their websites for guidance on how we move forward this summer and beyond. So that is the journey through the Active Communities tool. There is a lot of information within that. So I would encourage you guys to visit the PlanH website to spend a little bit more time with it and use it really as a partnership building tool. And let us know if you're using it, and if so, how you're using it. We'd love to get some feedback as well. Throughout this document, you can see some visual representations of ways that folks can be active, which are mostly outside, and that bodes well for the usefulness of this tool in the time of COVID, when we're being told that outdoor activity is preferable to being indoors at the moment. And I also wanted to note that movement and healthy living can be important cultural and personal forms of expression. So we added in some traditional dance on the right here with this dragon dance troupe here, as well as this jingle dancer. And the more that your community can do to be inclusive in terms of what recreation opportunities are available, the more likely that people will get out and get active safely and live longer better. Okay, so that was a lot of information just then. So thanks for staying with us. Are there any questions at this time about the Active Communities tool? Feel free to pop them into the chat box if there are any. Okay, so it looks like everyone's just going to download this document and start using it, which is great. If you do, like I said, use it, we'd love to hear how your organization or community is able to make it work for you. So let us know what you think about it. And again, visit the PlanH website in order to download it. So now I'd like to switch gears and do a deeper dive into using an equity lens, and then I will be handing you over to the breakout rooms. So first, using an equity lens requires acknowledging that systemic and historical discrimination has resulted in uneven distribution of resources. So here is an image showing the difference between equity and equality. Equality is everyone getting access to the same resource or opportunity, but equity is tailoring those resources and opportunities to fit the person. And another way of explaining this comes from Moira Wurr, who's a feminist leader in social work and women's entrepreneurship in South Australia. And Moira says that equality is everyone getting a shoe, but equity is everyone getting a shoe that fits. So again, that's sort of building on this bike image here, which works really well for an Active Communities webinar. And this image from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is great, but it is missing the structural barrier element. So we've talked about a 2.0 version of this, which might include some potholes for some people here, or someone else getting a flat tire, or maybe this person on over here has the bike, but she doesn't have the helmet. So the point is to start thinking about what are the structural elements that are creating systemic barriers for people to access physical activity and other opportunities for good health. And because of social movements for Indigenous rights, movements like Black Lives Matter, and even the Me Too movement, the discourse about racism, colonialism, and intersecting identities is appearing in all fields. Folks from all sector and at lots of different levels are confronting how systemic issues are unfairly impacting certain people while benefiting others. And this conversation is happening in public and it's happening internationally. So for example, here on the left is an open letter from the UK's sport and recreation community. This is an anti-racism statement from signatories across England with a lot of clout. And they are committing to improving access to active living to Black and other racialized people across the UK. And back here in Canada, the conversation is also happening. And just yesterday, I'm not sure if anyone else on this call was able to see this, but I was really excited to see this CC panel discussion, which was teasing apart some really complicated issues relating to Indigenous sport and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. Because when we talk about equity in terms of spaces for active communities, we must turn to lessons from Indigenous communities, because the living legacy of colonialism continues to impact the way that we relate to land. Indigenous peoples have been systematically pushed away from their lands so that recreation opportunities for settlers could be built. Some examples of outdoor recreation spaces that are problematic in this context are ski hills, mountain bike trails, cottage country, and golf courses. For reference, here are the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission relating to physical activity and I think specifically sport. I'm by no means an expert in this area, so I've kept it at a summary level. However, I am suggesting that the inclusion of physical activity and sport in particular into the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission places active communities and those of us who work on it in a position to take action on reconciliation through this equity lens. And I think that Emily has popped in the calls to action into the chat box. And finally, here's a great article in the Tyee from last year. It was written by Patrick Lucas, who is the founder of the Aboriginal Youth Mountain Bike Program. And in this article, Patrick recounts his experience witnessing the Tsuut'ina Nation here on the island give consent to the mountain bike community to ride on their sacred land back in 2013. And I'm not up to date on this this case, but there was a similar event which happened on the mainland with with the rock climbing community. So it's a really interesting piece to read to learn a little bit more. And like I said, this is definitely not an area of expertise for me, and I'm not up to date with the current situation, but the important piece to take away is that we have to consider how to balance the natural needs of the land with our enthusiasm for exercise while still remaining in relationship with the communities who are most impacted. So in conclusion, I'll leave you with an invitation, and the invitation is for, oh, sorry about that. The invitation is for you to consider these really complicated questions of equity as you move forward in your work, because at this moment we have a very interesting and immediate opportunity to build back a better community, a better active community in a good way in the wake of this pandemic. So thanks very much. All right, so with that, I am going to stop talking and turn you over to our amazing co-facilitators who you met earlier. In just a minute, Johanna is going to enable the breakout rooms. So what's going to happen is you'll see a little box pop up on your screen, which will invite you to join a room. Please click accept, and you will be added to a room with one of our co-facilitators. You'll briefly introduce yourselves, and then your facilitator will make sure that everyone's getting a chance to be heard from. So if you're generally a shy person who doesn't really talk much, please come out of your shell. We want to make sure that we hear from everybody today, and we want everyone's voices to be heard. Your co-facilitator will be taking some notes during the discussion. And as I mentioned, we will be doing some high-level theming of those notes and then sharing them back with you so you have a sense of what the conversations were in different breakout rooms. All right, so our first question is, how is your community creating an active community? Please share some success stories, and we'll see you in about 13 minutes. That was an exciting experience, having a chance to connect with different folks from around the province. It would be great to hear from a few of the rooms, some of the highlights of your conversations about how communities are creating active communities around BC. I think we'll have time, we'll give ourselves about 7 minutes or so to hear back from folks. Is there any facilitator who'd like to chat about what they heard in their room? Just raise your hand and I'll do my best to see you. All right, Kevin, what did you hear?
I heard a lot of great things, actually. We had a really unique group in that we had a person from Alberta and a person from BC. So we were able to sort of see just a little bit different how the sort of reopening to recreation is being approached, and like northern community versus island. And I live in Vancouver, so I think we got a good spread there. I think people have really seen the bike sellouts and the lineups at bike stores and inline skate stores and things like that are starting to sell out. Sorry, my baby's in the background screaming away. I thought one of the interesting things that was brought up was how people are reaching out in their own communities and creating their little bubbles for recreation, like a walking group or cycling groups and things like that are sticking out, even like younger kids getting skateboard groups together and that kind of thing. So I think that's sort of really neat to see. And trends around like booking your gym time and trying to plan out your life around the schedule that the gym provides, which may not always be conducive to your recreational pathway, but is still something that's being a unique presented sort of structure around return to sport and recreation. And I think sort of lastly around that, some of the unique partnerships was mentioned around like Cool, a small community, had a spin studio, was able to lease out all their bikes so that people could then attend the online class and have the equipment that they needed. So I thought that was an interesting approach in a small community. So that's some of our sort of key highlights.
Awesome. Thanks, Kevin. It sounds like you guys had a good spread, and also there's a lot of creativity that was brought up in your group. So that's really great. Thank you. Any other co-facilitators like to share?
I think Vanessa has her hand.
All right, Vanessa.
Well, thanks, Claire. We also had a really diverse range of people in our group, so it was kind of interesting to hear the different perspectives. Someone from Northern Health who kind of worked with other organizations and providing grants to those organizations. So again, a lot of the kind of bike lending programs, outdoor activities, kind of supplying equipment for boating, water activities, life jackets, and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And then some more like community-centered people in our group brought forward some ideas about adapting their programs. So we had a settlement worker who helped immigrants settle into their communities, primarily seniors. So they would adapt their activities to be a little bit easier physically. So they do walking, singing and dancing at care homes, and bringing in instructors for Tyee, that kind of thing. And then also some really great conversation around how the groups will adapt their programs going into like the colder weather with COVID-19 in mind. So there are a lot of online initiatives happening prizes going out and asking people to submit photos of their physical activities that they're doing, and kind of adapting some of the indoor activities, maybe walking through malls, for example, instead of doing a fitness class in a small room, that kind of thing.
Great. Thanks, Vanessa. That's awesome. I saw Samantha's hand and then Abby's, and then we'll return to our groups after that, and we'll hear all the other co-facilitators. So go ahead, Samantha.
Great, thank you so much. Yeah, we had a bit of a smaller group, but we had some really great discussion about what everyone's doing right now. And as some of the co-facilitators have already mentioned, some of the trends are definitely in terms of focusing on outdoor programming as we go into the summertime, and as well relaunching some pre-existing programs as we're now kind of in the moving forward with the province's restart plan. One thing that I thought was really interesting, we had two members of our breakout group who were involved in a regional coordination program, where essentially different physical activity providers or municipal groups in that region would coordinate on communicating and messaging what information is known, where everyone's at, just to make sure that the community is receiving consistent messaging. And that was really interesting to me, because certainly something that we've seen at the MIABC is this, there's a lot of information, some misinformation out there, and trying to weed through that and be able to provide your community with cohesive messaging around, what is safe, what isn't safe, what should we be doing, what shouldn't we be doing. So I thought that was really great and excellent to see these adjacent communities come together to make sure that they're best able to support their community in that way. And another topic that we talked about that was really interesting is the differences in terms of challenges and opportunities as between larger municipalities or regional districts and then smaller communities. So, with larger communities having, more access in terms of some resources to kind of divide out work and things of that nature, and as well, being able to adapt a little bit better because they have that larger kind of breadth, but at the same time, finding that, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing sometimes, and that coordination aspect becoming quite challenging. And then one of our group members from a smaller local government was saying that they found that wasn't the case, because of course they can kind of go to the office next door and speak to the person who's doing this other aspect of organizing a program or relaunching something. But at the same time, they found there was a big information overload in terms of material that was coming out for sport and recreation information, and not necessarily having all those programs in their community and having to kind of sift through and filter through what was relevant to them, because they simply weren't offering, didn't have all of those facilities or didn't offer all those types of programs. So some really interesting themes coming out of that discussion for sure.
Great. Thanks, Sam, for that really great recap. And it sounds like the size of the communities kind of echoes what Kevin was bringing up at the beginning, and the information overload, that is so true in recreation, sport, everything is a bit of an information overload these days. So it's, that's great that came up. I think Abby was next, and then we'll see if we can squeeze one more person in here. Go ahead, Abby.
Okay, I'll just unmute myself. Yeah, very similar themes from what we were discussing. Just quickly, some of the additional things that I was saying. Small communities was our little group, and just things still taking their time to start to play out. One of the things that we were discussing is reaching out to more vulnerable populations and what that looks like and could potentially look like as we build some of this stuff out, as things start to open up and be more active and creating that the area around that. One of the interesting things was looking at the reaching out for awareness of information and activity and keeping people moving forward. And how do we provide people with information for them to then take the next steps to be active in their communities. And so that was really interesting. The other thing that I found quite interesting is a lot of these groups are kind of creating their own space. Like the seniors are going for walks, or you've got smaller groups going swimming on a lake where they're so physically distancing. So in a lot of ways, people are taking on their own end of it, and how do we support them from a more of an organizational level to give them the tools to move forward. So that was a big part of our discussion.
Yeah, fabulous. Thanks, Abby. That's great. Is there one more co-facilitator who'd like to add something in? Or I see Tina over here. Sorry, Marina, I see you as well. So let's go with Tina and then over to Marina.
Hey, mine is pretty short. We had a small group, but Sarah shared an interesting example about turning to social media to raise awareness about recreation opportunities in the community. So as Yuki Rec had developed a new Facebook page called Yuki Rec Recreation. I'm sorry, I missed that part of my notes. We're not clear enough. But at any rate, they use that forum to let people know what's open or not, ideas to get active outside, activity challenges like skip at home. And also this was felt to reach a broad audience because there was, fun pictures, some humor injected as well to kind of keep people's spirits up, and also looking at not just physical challenges, but also well-being challenges. So that's what we shared.
Awesome. Thank you, Tina.
Oh yeah, Sarah shared, it's the Yuki Recreation Recreated. That was great. Thank you, Sarah.
Awesome. Abby is a happy camper over there hearing that shout out. Marina? Marina,
there we go.
There we go.
There we go. So my group was relatively small as we were having a little bit of technical difficulties, but one of the things that really stuck with me in our discussion was particularly with the size of the local government that was part of the discussion, because they have had some staff turnover, particularly at the higher levels, for quite a number of years. And I didn't really make that connection in terms of what that would mean for programming until she shared it, because really with all that turnover, things get put on the back burner, and things like recreational programming in a small local government just don't become as high of a priority. I mean, it's still a priority, but there are barriers there. And even though that there are grants available, there's a lot of time and cost in some ways to access those grants. So I thought that was really eye-opening. And then the other thing that came up with respect to that community is where they're located. They're in the middle of Freshet, which unfortunately has closed down their local park. So while they see more people out walking, particularly as a result of COVID-19 and us using more outdoor spaces, one of their major spaces is off the table for them. So I thought that was really interesting, because that was not a perspective that I expected.
Yeah. Thanks, Marina. That's yeah, it sounds like those were really great discussions, and that actually leads us into our next spot. How do we make sure that this is a priority, especially as we're moving forward through COVID? And in my little spiel earlier, I was saying, maybe one way that we do this is by adding an equity lens to make it relevant and remind people of the importance of creating equitable, active communities. So we are going to break back up into our rooms. It's 11:37 now, so we're doing good on time. We are going to collapse the rooms so that we will have 5 people per room. If there are any issues with technical difficulties, the co-facilitators have done a great job of forwarding people on to Joe. So we'll break you guys back up, and we'll do another report back at the end and then wrap up the session. All right, everyone, welcome back. I hope that was another great discussion. Joe and I were just saying it's a good sign that people were taking their time getting back into the room. So hopefully that was the sign of some connections being made. Let's do another report back. Last time we didn't get a chance to hear from Lindsay or Kim. So if either of you would like to start, please feel free.
Yeah, I can go. Lindsay.
Go ahead, Lindsay, and then Kim.
Yeah, in both conversations in both rounds, we had some great conversations. But when it came to equity, we talked a bit about how shifting to an online format was reaching new populations that weren't maybe as engaged before, and that was exciting. There was a sentiment that having online options as COVID lasts, and then, you know, beyond that would probably continue on because it does draw in new people. That said, in smaller communities, there's some questions around, you know, can we sustain that? Do we have the numbers to do that?
Lindsay, can I just interrupt you there? Could you hold the phone a little bit closer? We're just having a hard time hearing you.
Sorry.
Thanks.
Is this better?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, so what I was just saying, that the online space was drawing in people that hadn't been connected earlier, and that was exciting and something that might stay in some communities that had the populations and capacity to support that second level of programming. We talked about how when COVID hit, the groups that were connected, a lot of them continued to stay connected in spite of not having a physical space to go. But the people who were more on the fringes of those groups, who maybe would take advantage of coming to a space but weren't as connected to the people there, they were a little bit more lost. And so one community took some extra effort to make sure that people who were a little bit less connected were still finding ways to stay online, especially if they weren't on social media or comfortable online. And in this new world, a lot of one community's work was happening through social media. A lot of their market, that was how people were finding out about things, and there was a gap for individuals who weren't on social media and might have found out about opportunities by physically coming into their building. So just thinking about that. Yeah, I thought it was a lot of really great equity considerations in the pre-COVID and new landscape, but people did identify that there was certainly an appetite for more information and questions and supports in thinking about this in general and in this new world.
Great. Thank you, Lindsay. And that digital divide is something that we're hearing about a lot in terms of engagement. And again, some notes about smaller communities versus larger communities. So that seems to be coming up a lot. Kim, if you have anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, our group had some really group discussions around bringing program ability in, and just the lack of funding that there might be to bring someone that has the lived experience, and being able to access those people that could bring that in, as well as the education development around internally within organizations. And I think someone within our group said, you know, that we bring a lot of strengths to the table, but look at the gaps that your organization has, and to bring in people that could fill those gaps in, to bring that equity lens in and whatnot. And then creating those, a strong partnership. And then Jen had broken it down to like actual like stats, like how many people should be brought to the table when you're creating those spaces for conversation and for dialogue. Mm-hmm. And then from that end of things, it's, sorry, my notes are all over because I'm looking at notes on here, which someone gave me some notes, and then notes on my other thing. But basically what it boiled down to is with bringing in those people that with lived experiences that can speak to what they're missing, and what their gaps are, what they need, create those strong partnerships, and connect directly with people that are missing from your table. And creating those safe spaces, and knowing what those gaps are and how to fill them.
Awesome. Thanks, Kim. Jen, is there anything you wanted to add on to that?
No, I think that Kim really captured it. Sorry if I bombarded Kim with a whole bunch of notes I captured in the chat box, so she's probably overwhelmed. I think that was really great. It was, I felt like our group really did an amazing job of quickly drilling right into the core issues around what, how do we start working through equity, and it's who's at the table, who are you hearing from, who are you not hearing from, and making sure that those voices with lived experience who are most impacted by these issues and will be most impacted by the end results of what's being done are heard from, and are heard from proportionately. Not as an equal representation of one for one at a table. You need at least 2 or 3 or even more people at the table with those direct lived experiences to allow the creation of that safe space for conversation and safe space for planning, which is what Cheryl was talking about in our group. So
great, thanks, Jen. I'm looking forward to seeing these notes. Jake, you were in a couple of those discussions as well. Did you want to add anything as another ear?
Yeah, I was in a conversation just with Tina and Sarah, and so Tina had said if you wanted to jump in here, I would let you hold this space.
Sure, I'll jump in, Jake, thanks.
Yeah.
I think what we talked about was like in addition to when we're talking about the discussion about equity, and I think you said it so well, Claire, at the beginning, that we need to consider social determinants of health, like systemic barriers. There's also a consideration of environmental determinants of health that came up in our discussion about the interaction with people in their environment, specifically bears. So bear activity in Prince George this spring has been really prominent, and there's been a few unfortunate interactions with bears where somebody's dog got killed during a walk and 2 women were attacked. That's pretty unusual activity, but it's just an example of barriers that may be faced in different settings. So even though Prince George is a really urban setting, and we have access to a lot of green space, which would kind of seem equitable, there's still consideration of a barrier about bear safety and awareness. And earlier during COVID, there was challenges with icy conditions and not wanting to go out and fall and slip. And then now with springtime, there's a lot of bear activity. So that's something that we kind of dived into in our discussion.
All right. Yeah, thank you so much for bringing up that environmental aspect as well, in addition to the social determinants of health. Were there any other comments from the co-facilitators for the equity discussion? Oh, all right. Well, in that case, I'll ask if there's any questions or comments from the rest of the group as we wrap up for these last 2 minutes. Questions, comments, feel free to pop them into the chat box and Emily can direct us to them. Looks like we answered all of the questions, which is great. If you have anything that you'd like to ask as follow-up, feel free to get in touch with us. We will be putting this on YouTube. It has been recorded, and again, we will be sending out an evaluation survey. I just wanted to thank everybody so much for your amazing contributions, especially our co-facilitators. We really appreciate you guys taking the time to meet beforehand and learn a little bit about this new platform, and also for bringing your skill and experience to bear on this really important discussion. Thanks so much, everybody, and please keep in touch. This is my contact information on the screen, and yeah, we hope you have a good rest of your Tuesday, and look out for an email from us as a wrap-up. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Very much.
Thank you.